Generals gathered in their masses. Please don't copyright my asses.
Oopsie, the worst rapper alive. Oops. Yeah. Big Mac's back on the mic like oops. Back on the horse, still jumping through hoops. I'm missing Lincoln Pink, I don't lip sync. Just to be clear, choking isn't my kink, but I do it anyway sometimes, I guess. Gotta laugh now, die later in my times of stress. I'm blessed, feeling good, charged up like a Hadouken.
Mota Jitabanakis, welcome into the Worst Wrestling Podcast. I am your host with the least, Jack Lucenay. Hey, we used to be once a week, but lately we are whenever we can get it in. I was watching War Games this week, and I thought rather than doing a review, let's do a top 10 War Games matches, and let's see where this year's War Games ranks on my personal list. So this is the top 10 best War Games matches. These are ranked in order of my favorite, to be quite frank. That's the criteria for best to worst here. And so let's kick it off with number 10. The originator, the Great American Bash Tour in 1987, July 4th at the Omni Coliseum in Atlanta, Georgia, and then again in July 31st at the Miami Orange Bowl in Miami, Florida. These were the original two War Games matches featuring Dusty Rhodes, the creator, the innovator of the War Games match. Road Warriors, Animal and Hawk, Paul Ellering and Nikita Koloff versus the Four Horsemen, Flair, Arn, Luger, Tully, Blanchard, and J.J. Dillon. Dillon was replaced in the second match by the War Machine. But guys, this is historic. This is where it all started. And what I love too is kind of foreshadowing the War Games that would come later, when it would finally return to NXT. You have the whore horsemen. Yeah, a bunch of whores they were. They actually were though. But the Four Horsemen, you almost have like a reiteration of them in the Undisputed Era, who will be all over this list later on. And you have kind of teams like the War Raiders, Insanity, and affectations of Authors of Pain, who have Paul Ellering as a manager. So you have all of these intangibles and affectations of War Games, but it all goes back to the tour in 1987. And eventually, it was on the tour until 1992 when they did it on the pay-per-view Wrestle War. And then it would become a mainstay of Fall Brawl, basically until it died. A hard death did the War Games on a WCW Monday Night Nitro in Dallas on September 4th in the year of 2000. That will not be on this list. But what is on this list is number 9. Dusty and Dustin standing tall together. So Dusty Rhodes and his son, the natural Dustin Rhodes, long before he would wear the gold and become Goldust. So it's Dusty, his son, and the Nasty Boys versus Terry Funk, Arn Anderson, Bunkhouse Buck, and Colonel Robert Parker. This was at Fall Brawl in 1994. What I loved about this one in particular of all the old ones, because to be quite frank, in doing the research for this video, which I say research, it was really just watching every War Games match I could get my hands on. But in watching a lot of the old ones, like the finish would kind of come out of nowhere sometimes, or it would just be like a complete clusterfuck. The old cage kind of looked shitty, and it was weird with the roofs. And they tried to use the roof. A lot of times you'd see that guy do the press slam into the ceiling, and I was like, I don't oh no, he got his back on the mesh fence a little bit. It just, I don't know. we're fickle, I think, wrestling fans nowadays. We overlook just how much wrestling has evolved.
Fickle. They're fickle.
But what I loved about this also, Dustin, as in, the son, the natural, aka Goldust. I'll just call him Goldust for the sake of limiting confusion. But Goldust in his natural gimmick was he had this gimmick where he would use the boot to beat the person up. Like, so in the first War Games match that I was watching, it was actually the 1993 one. It was his own boot that he lost. He was using it to beat people up. And this one, he was using the opponent's boot. I think it might have been Bunkhouse Buck's boot that he was using to beat people up. But at the end, you got huge pops for when they finally got their hands on the squeamish, scared heel Colonel Parker. This one also had a good length of action, and it was one of the better endings because, like I said, you had them finally. It was almost apropos of what we saw kind of in this year's War Games, where Solo at the end gets his comeuppance from the entire War Games team. We saw it was that ending, but with Colonel Parker playing the role of the heel to a massive pop. So this one came in at number 9. At number 8, probably a controversial one. Team Black and Gold versus NXT 2.0. In watching it back, I think, at the time, people were kind of shitting and poo-pooing on the fact of, oh, we couldn't get any big names for this match. And it's like, now that you look back on it, though, Team Black and Gold was Gargano and Ciampa with LA Knight and Pete Dunne. And then on NXT 2.0, you had Braun Breaker, Carmelo Hayes, Grayson Waller, and Tony D'Angelo. Like, that's a pretty solid lineup. And you know what? The match, better than I bet people remember. Go back and watch this Team Black and Gold versus NXT 2.0. It had a lot of great spots. All of these guys are excellent wrestlers. This is what I meant about fans being fickle. Like, the fact that people were calling this the worst War Games match.
Fickle. They're fickle.
Literally every single dude on this list, even like the ones I hate. Like, I hate Grayson Waller. I'm supposed to. He's a heel, but he is a fantastic in-ring wrestler. Tony D'Angelo has really kind of improved along the way. I mean, what can you say about Pete Dunne in the ring? Like, probably the worst guy in the ring here is LA Knight, who has a magnetic personality and charisma falling out of his ears. But yeah, this was actually a pretty solid match. You had Trick Williams on the outside too, helping Carmelo Hayes' team until Dexter Lumis showed up to scare him off and give a little heads up to Johnny Gargano. So I thought that was a fun little spot too. And then ultimately, Braun Breaker kicked out of an air raid siren through a table, and then he puts Ciampa through a table, and he ends up winning the War Games match for his team and setting up what would be his eventual NXT title match and run. So I thought it was the correct decision. Maybe that's part of it too, is people felt it was obvious that Braun Breaker would inevitably win this match, but I thought it was a fun War Games match. Number 7. The original again, but this time for NXT. Yes, that's right. The original War Games match on NXT that featured Undisputed Era versus the Authors of Pain and Roddy Strong with Paul Ellering managing versus Sanity. Y'all remember Sanity? Sometimes I swear to God, I'll remember spots from this match, and I'm like remembering Killian Dane, and I'm like, oh yeah, the War rate. Wait, Killian Dane. My guy, he was the original Big Beefy in the War Games match. But I love the format too, and I think they should get back to this maybe, is getting back to changing up the format of the War Games every so often so that not every single year has to be the 5-on-5. I actually really loved in this format, they did 3 teams, and they just released, so you have your one guy in the ring, and then they would just release one team at a time. So it would be a full 3-on-1 advantage technically. And you kind of get situations too where it's like, obviously, if you're the two guys in the ring, even though you're on an opposing team, you got to face three guys now. They start teaming up to take out. So you get a lot of cool interactions. I think it just makes things a little different. And I thought it was a quicker pace too, because again, you're letting an entire team in as opposed to just one guy at a time. So it's like there's two guys coming in the cage every time, and you only have to go through 3 periods before all 3 teams are in the War Games match officially. That's something that I really like too. But just a lot of great spots here. You know, Killian Dane locking the door and eating the key after filling the cage with weapons. And this was like after they were the last team in. So this was to officially, as opposed to like locking another team out, which has always kind of been the strategy for War Games. They did Sandy, they locked everybody in. They're like, no, you're not even trying to get out of this. I know you can to forfeit. You're not forfeiting. And he ate the key. I thought that was a fun spot. It was an amazing match. It leads to an avalanche suplex off the top of the cage from Roddy to Adam Cole. And then Adam Cole somehow surviving all of this. In the aftermath, he would hit a last shot to Eric Young with a chair for a good measure. And this would set up Undisputed Era's run through NXT. Number 6. This was in 2022. No, 2023. So this was not this year, last year. So this gets a little muddled and confusing. But this was essentially the return of CM Punk is what everyone remembers, which is why I have it lower on the list at number 6. Because ultimately the War Games match itself and even the return of Randy Orton was overshadowed ultimately by the return of CM Punk in Chicago. But you had Seth Rollins, Cody Rhodes, Sami Zayn, Jey Uso, and inevitably, ultimately showing up at the last minute, Randall Orton versus the Judgment Day. You had Damian Priest, Dom, Finn, JD, and Drew McIntyre rounding out the 5. Randy Orton doesn't show up basically until halfway through the match as the final entrant. And there were some great spots and everything, but this all comes down to Randy Orton coming in and clearing house after being off for a year. They did this amazing RKO where they throw Big Head McGee, a.k.a. JD McGunna. They throw him off the top of the cage into an RKO from Randy. And that was basically the end of the match. They had some other cool spots like Cody using the bull rope, or, they did the weird fake Damian Priest cash in again, which was cut off by Randy Orton. I hear voices in my head. They had the 5 draping DDT spot. And it was funny because Michael Cole yelled out, "Vintage War Games." I'm like, has nothing to do with War Games, but okay. It was just funny to see like the 5 draping DDT spot. And that's just like a spot they do in every War Games match now, where it's like at some point you either have to have both teams, one in each side of the ring, facing off against each other, or you have to have the 5 heels in the middle with the faces on the outside, and they start beating the shit out of the heels all in the middle. So that's just something I've noticed. But even after the biggest RKO ever to JD McDonough, that wasn't the end of the match. The end of the match was actually Damian Priest eating a crossroads for 1, 2, 3. And then, of course, after the match, when everyone's celebrating, look in my eyes, what do you see? A motherfucker who cannot sing. CM Punk returns. So it was a bit of a clusterfuck, but it was a really good War Games match. And that'll lead us into number 5. This year's War Games. So originally in this spot, I actually had the Undisputed Era versus Team McAfee. Remember when Pat McAfee was running around in NXT? That was a great match. Pat McAfee really surprised. But I had to move it off this list for this year's War Games. This year's War Games for the men. I mean, the women were a bit of a clusterfuck. They kind of got it going in the end. I loved Io Sky's spot with the moonsault in the trash can. That's just kind of her bit now. But the men's Survivor Series War Games, see it obviously the original Bloodline, Roman, Jimmy J, and Sami Zayn, and CM Punk, who's now owed a favor, and the Bloodline with Solo, the Tongas, the Wolfman, Jacob Fatu, and Bronson Reed. And I loved the tension between Roman and CM Punk, the way that Roman stopped him from going into the match and let Sami Zayn go. And then the way he was kind of preening, getting himself ready to go in, and Punk just kind of shoulders past him to go in the match before him. And you see Roman giving the quivering lip to show that he's pissed off. And the way that he goes in the ring and helps up his entire team except for CM Punk. But by the end, CM Punk proves himself in the eyes of Roman Reigns, mostly when he saves him from a big-ass tsunami off the top of the cell, which looked fucking insane. Bronson Reed going through the table. That took him out for the rest of the match. I think overall, this is one that I think some people will remember and say is the greatest War Games. I will vehemently disagree. And I think the way that you could have got there and what definitely felt like it was missing was The Rock. And I actually think that the way that I thought they were going to tell the story and the way that I think this could have been way a little bit better, to be perfectly honest, to really stick it to Roman Reigns and make it feel like he has to overcome just like the world. I actually think that rather than CM Punk and Paul Heyman and the whole shtick, I think The Rock should have been the fifth member. I think Roman should have reached out to his cousin and said, hey, I need you for this. And you have The Rock be the fifth member, and you have The Rock turn on Roman in the match. And turns out that The Rock is the puppet master behind Solo. And even though Solo is the tribal chief, The Rock is the one that is behind him for tribal chief and against Roman because of what all went down at WrestleMania and the build up to and and that sets up Roman versus Rock at WrestleMania. So I think there's a little bit of a missed opportunity in that respect. But the story that they told, I thought was great for what it was with Punk. I think it sets things up with Seth Rollins potentially in the future. It sets up things with Roman in the future. So, you have this whole favor hanging now with Paul Heyman. So I do think that it was deserving to be in the top 5, but I put it at 5. Number 4, The Bloodline versus the Brawling Brutes, Kevin Owens and Drew McIntyre. So the original Bloodline War Games match. This was the one back in 2022 where Sami Zayn had to prove himself to the Bloodline. And I loved going back and watching this, especially having now just watched the most recent War Games. And I highly recommend just, again, the storytelling of this one is so much better. You had Sammy couldn't get along with Jimmy. And so Roman forces them to start the match together. You had all these moments where Sheamus and Kevin Owens and Drew McIntyre, who have all been victimized personally by the Bloodline, are getting their comeuppance and their revenge. So you have all these great stories and Sammy's arc through the entire War Games match. Not only proving himself to Roman Reigns, but proving himself to Jey Uso. And at the end, saving Roman, delivering the haluva kick to Kevin Owens, and laying him out for Jey Uso to win the War Games match. Man, this was just storytelling 101. We don't got to belabor the point. We can get into the top 3. Number 3, Team Ciampa versus the Undisputed Era. So the Undisputed Era War Games matches are definitely my favorites. Number 3 was Team Ciampa versus Undisputed Era. This is back at NXT War Games 2019 when the Undisputed Era was at the height of their powers. They had all the gold, baby. You had Adam Cole was the NXT champion. You had Roderick Strong as the North American title holder. And then you had O'Reilly and Fish as the tag team champs. So all of them coming in with all the gold. Cole and Cole was on a run to remember. This was like the month of Cole because he faced Daniel Bryan on SmackDown, Seth Rollins on Raw, and then he won the advantage in the ladder match against Dominik Dijakovic. Team Ciampa was obviously Tommaso Ciampa, Keith Lee, Dominik Dijakovic, and the final mystery entrant was unnamed. We didn't know who it was. You get through the match, and Ciampa and Roddy started out, and then Team Ciampa, only has the 3 members. They finally all get in, and you see Undisputed Era is dominating, and the countdown starts, and there's that great pause that WWE always does, and then Kevin Owens returns to NXT as part of Team Ciampa. He basically came in, a huge pop for KO, doing a lot of his old moves. This was just vintage. You want to talk about vintage, right? No, this was vintage Kevin Owens. It finished with a Ciampa air raid siren from the top of the cage to Adam Cole through tables. So crazy fucking finish. You had the big pop and surprise from Kevin Owens returning to NXT to side with Team Ciampa. You had Undisputed Era with all the gold. You had all the things that made that era of NXT special. And speaking of that era of NXT, number 2, the exact same year, and this was the only women's match that kind of made the list, and there were a couple of them. Shout out to the Women's Survivor Series matches of 2021 and 2022 in WWE. They were close to making the list, but not quite, because I wanted to make sure to include the historical ones and everything else. Our number 2, Team Ripley versus Team Baszler. So this was Candice LeRae, Tegan Nox, Dakota Kai, and of course Rhea Ripley, and they were the face team versus Shayna Baszler, Io Sky, back then Io Shirai, Bianca Belair, who I forgot was even a heel back then, and Kaylee Ray at NXT War Games 2019. And this was really our first and only true taste of Bianca Belair versus Rhea Ripley. But it was flipped where it's like Rhea was the face and Bianca was the heel. So that was kind of weird. But yeah, this match really comes down to the betrayal. And even watching it back, it still hits just as hard. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it is when Dakota Kai, it's her turn to enter, and the only one left is Tegan Nox, and she turns around and kicks Tegan Nox in the face, and then beats her up, and then lays her out with her leg stretched through the door and starts slamming the door of the cage onto her knee, completely wrecks Tegan Nox's knee and takes her out of the match, and then also leaving Rhea Ripley's team down 4-2. And then Shayna coming in, and I miss this version of Shayna Baszler when she was fully dominant as the Queen of Spades. The only faux pas to me, and I see people complaining about how Rhea is booked as like a dominant monster that can never lose. This was like the original version of that. It's 4-on-2 in War Games, and Rhea. It was a cool finish. She ends up handcuffing herself to Shayna, and they're kind of going back and forth. And she dodges a counter knee into the riptide through some chairs for the win. But it's just the fact of Shayna Baszler definitely should have won this match. That's kind of the only faux pas. I actually think this could have been number one if not for the fact that Rhea Ripley just gets that John Cena, Lol Cena wins booking. But it's neither here nor there. It was still a fantastic match. And we'll round it out with number one. When I think of War Games, this is the one that I always remember. This is the one I think of fondly. It was Pete Dunne, Ricochet, and the War Raiders versus the Undisputed Era at NXT War Games 2018. This is the second War Games in NXT history. You had Nigel and Morrow on commentary. Back when the Undisputed Era was fully formed. Back when Ricochet and Pete Dunne were ascending superstars. Back when the War Raiders were cool. Bobby Fish locking Pete Dunne in the cage so he can't get out. And that was the first time they'd done that bit. And so it looked actually really clever because he took the lock off his cage and put it on Pete Dunne's cage and then threw the key away. They eventually come out with bolt cutters to get Dune out. And again, just a fantastic match between a bunch of dudes who can wrestle their fucking asses off. And this ended with Pete Dunne and Ricochet both pinning Adam Cole after a bitter end in 720. They get one arm each. The UK title holder back then, because he was the UK champion, and Ricochet was the North American champion. They both get the one arm over Adam Cole for the pin, who was the NXT champion at the time. But ultimately, it would lead to Team Ricochet and Dunne leading the way. That's what also led to like that short-lived tag team between Ricochet and Pete Dunne. But to me, this is the one I always remember and think back of fondly as my favorite War Games match of all time. So, hey, we made it to the end of the list. You guys let me know where I went wrong. Let me know in the comments what are your favorite War Games matches and moments. Please make sure to like and subscribe the video. That always helps. But until the next time, I will catch all of you guys on the flip side.
My positive contact results in affirmative impact. Never vulgarize on raps. I'm never primitive, but cannibalistic, vicious characteristics, hereditary potency, episodic genes, yo. Aim at the HMCs at extraordinary speed. Seven to me is light. Slipping in razor blades and grease in your bare feet. I see your fucking colleagues misprise you very much to your dismay. So today, I can say you won't be running away. Hold your tail between your legs. Never to advocate when you feel with low stakes. I'll take a hacksaw to you cockeyed mumble rap slack jaws. Leave you shredded on the side like some coleslaw. Then double time with that clothesline from hell like Bradshaw. I'm toxic like septic shock. A dying breed like Anorak.